hour of sleep we got last night?
Yes.
No? How? It wasn't enough. I can't agree with that. It's better than nothing, I mean. Right? Okay. Well, welcome to the first week of our annual student sermon series. This year we're going to be focused on the power of words and their similarity to fire. Hence the name, Playing with Fire. Today I'm going to be exploring kind words and how we can use them to build up the relationships we have with other people. Before I tell you a little bit about myself, I wanted to give y'all a little heads up. So how many of y'all watch YouTube? Do y'all? Yeah? Okay, so I've been told that the way I give a sermon is kind of like a TED Talk, but not so long. So it's going to be a little bit like that. It's different from like how Abe and Scott speaks, but just hang in there. So a little bit about myself. First of all, my name's Emma. I'm a junior at Lafayette High, and I've been an intern here at the Bayou since my sophomore year. This is my first semester in Legacy, and I can honestly say that Legacy is one of my favorite places to be and things to do, and I've had opportunities and lessons that I couldn't get anywhere else, like the sermon. I highly recommend signing up for a spring semester if you're thinking about doing so. In addition to Legacy, I spent a lot of time at school, which oddly enough is one of my favorite places because I like to learn. I know it's weird, and I get it all the time, but I definitely do like school. In addition to school, I like to read, watch TV shows, and listen to music. My favorite TV shows have always been Riverdale, The 100, and the originals. Does anyone watch any of those?
Yes.
Y'all,
100!
The 100, yeah. They're taking a 2-week break right now, and I'm kind of upset, but I'm going to get over it. And then my favorite music at the moment is definitely Lauren Daigle's album, Look Up Child. If y'all haven't heard it, I highly recommend listening to it. So that pretty much sums me up, but there's one more thing I wanted to talk about before we went into the sermon. So I'm super excited that I have the chance to talk about the power of words today because communication is actually my word for the year. What that means is basically the small group that I'm in chooses a word that we want to be our challenge for the year. Now, on Wednesday nights, I co-lead a group of small 8th grade girls. And at our first meeting, when we talked about the idea of having a word, they really liked it, so we decided to do that. And I chose one too, and mine was communication, as I said before. I chose communication because I believe it makes or breaks how people are impacted by you. Now, I'm not going to lie, it hasn't been easy stepping out of my comfort zone and communicating this year, especially like on a public communication level. But I'm honored that I have the chance to build on those skills today. So, to give you all a quick overview of the sermon series, we are going to be talking about how words are very powerful and they're very similar to fire too, because they can be used for the creation or the destruction of things. It's just how you use it. So to give you all a quick little story, when I was a kid, which is basically a really long time ago, right? I was in Girl Scouts for a couple of years, but the main thing is I went camping a ton when I was a kid. My family loved to camp. And no matter where we went, we usually tended to go to state parks. No matter where we went or when we did have stuff come up, we always went this time of year for Thanksgiving break. Recently, we stopped camping because me and my sister have crazy schedules. I have a lot of stuff for school and she has a lot of stuff for sports. But I'll always love what camping gave us because I have a ton of really good memories from it. Those vacations were honestly the most relaxing ones we went on. And to top it all off, we got to eat a bunch of s'mores and sit by the fire, which who wouldn't love that, right? So when we did go camping, we weren't in the middle of nowhere in a tent where you'd think like the movie sets it where the bear like comes in and like claws you. We went what I like to call glamping, which if you can't tell, it's a combination of the word glam and camping. So we went glamping in an air-conditioned RV with Wi-Fi, TVs, and a bunch of other stuff that a tent wouldn't have. Now, fire was originally meant for heat and for cooking food, but we used our fire to be cozy, eat s'mores, and to have a nice place to talk. So my mom always made sure we were super prepared when we did go camping. We had gazillions of blankets, more food than we could possibly eat, and plenty to do. We were never supposed to be bored. However, no matter how prepared we were, if we brought fire starters and logs, no one can guarantee that the park was allowing fires that weekend. The fire would be successful, and the smell of smoke wouldn't linger for days, which is one of my least favorite things about camping. But no matter what we couldn't control, when we did have fire, we were very happy because We were able to have good conversations and the time passed faster. So all in all, I think fire was one of the most important parts of camping because we had so many good things associated with it. But that was only because we used fire for good things. Similarly, words are only good if we use them for good things. Now, this sermon compares words to fire and their importance to each other. But I thought it would be kind of weird if we didn't understand a little bit about words and a little bit about fire before we actually compared the two. So, that saying, on one hand we have fire. Now, I don't know how much y'all know about fire, but as I said before, I have a lot of experience with it because I've been around it my entire life. But in case you aren't familiar, fire is a lot more than something just for s'mores. It actually has 3 inputs for a successful fire, and I want you to keep these 3 in mind as we go through the sermon. Oxygen, fuel, and heat. Now, there are 3 inputs, and the weird thing is there's also 3 outputs. The outputs of fire are light, more heat, and smoke. But notice, the good, light, and heat outweigh what is usually considered bad, smoke. So we can say that fire has the potential to be better more often than it has the opportunity to be bad. So now that we understand a little bit about fire, we need to look into words, right? So we're all familiar with words because we all talk, right? But if you're anything like me, especially when I was in middle school, I loved to talk. I never stopped talking. I tended to overcomplicate whatever I was saying just so I could keep on talking. It was a little bit excessive at some points, and I sometimes got in trouble at school. I'd like to say I've grown out of talking, but I mean, I agreed to come up here and talk, so I can't have grown out of it too much. We like to think that the way we communicate is complex, and in a way it is, because we're complex people and we're talking to other complex people. But if we're being honest, the way we communicate and the words we use aren't that complex. If we start, there's over 200,000 words in the English language, which is a lot. I'm sure we don't know that many. But we can simplify it by a lot. So, out of those 200,000 words, the majority of the time, so let's just say 95% of the time, we only use 3,000 words. So if we wanted to simplify it to the most, we really only use 3,000 words in our day-to-day conversations, which is a big jump from 200,000. And you might be thinking that's still crazy big. And the truth is we can simplify it still. There's 26 letters that will make up all of those 3,000 words. There's no more, there's no 27, there's only 26 letters that will make up what you say to me, what I say to you, what we read. There's nothing else from those letters that will change. And the crazy thing is, it depends on how people arrange those 26 letters and how they speak it to us that impact a lot of how we feel about ourselves. And we did simplify it by a lot. We went from 200,000 to 3,000 to 26. And we can still go further. Those letters, they're just a bunch of lines and curves, which is 2 things, line and curve. And those lines and curves aren't important. If you don't give each letter significance, then it won't significantly impact you. But on the other hand, if you do choose words and letters with significance, you have the opportunity to change lines and curves to 26 letters to 1 movement for God. Now that we understand a little bit about words and a little bit about fire, how could they even possibly be connected? And more importantly, how can this be used for God, right? Well, that leads me to my first point. We have God-given oxygen. If we go back to the 3 things that a fire needs to survive, oxygen was one of them. In order for our kind words to not even survive, but to just be something that we're used to using, we need to go into and apply what God has given us as our life guide, our oxygen, the Bible. Now, before I go into a couple verses that build on the fact that we do have God-given oxygen, I wanted to emphasize the importance of the Bible. So, when I said I really like to read, I meant it. I could stay up here and I can go through all of the books I've read this year, which is a lot. I've read 30 so far and I wanted to do more, but I couldn't. But to sum it up, I really like to read. I have hundreds of books in my room and my parents get mad when I order more, but I love to read. You're getting the picture. We could stand up here for hours and I can go through every book I've ever read, but that would get super boring. So I decided to shorten the list to 1 book. There's only ever been one book where the author has loved me back, and if you can take a guess, that's the Bible. I realized this whenever I came back from my sophomore year high school camp, and it changed me so much that I got baptized, I joined Legacy Internship, and it ordered me a brand new Bible. Now, when I got the Bible, I had the intentions of reading it cover to cover as quickly as possible, because that's just something I wanted to do, to say like, ooh, I read the Bible, and da-da-da-da-da. And I did read a majority of the Bible very quickly, but there were months at a time where I would read absolutely nothing from the Bible. And during those times, I had a ton of schoolwork, so I thought it was justified because school was crazy or I had a bunch of tests coming up. So in my mind, it really was a good reason to not read the Bible. But when I look back at those situations a year away, I realized that school wasn't hard because school was hard because I wasn't reading the Bible. Since my junior year, I've restarted the Bible with a new one because I felt like my old Bible represented goals that I didn't want to achieve. I wanted to instead learn the Bible instead of quickly reading it. And so far, it's been better this year because I understand more and I want to read it. Now, I'm not up here to give a sermon on why we should all read, because I get that a lot of people really don't like to read. So I thought it was important that you know that kindness comes from the heart, and of course, whenever you have the Word of God in your heart, it's a lot easier to spread kindness. And if you don't like to read, I thought it would be cool to bring up the point that there's this app called YouVersion. Now, YouVersion is a Bible app, and it does have the whole Bible on it, but it also has daily devotionals where you can read a short amount of verses, they're explained, and you get to pick the topic on what your devotionals are about. If you don't like to read, you can definitely download this app, and it's honestly one of the most influential apps that I have on my phone. So, if we hop back into a few verses that build on the point that we have God-given oxygen, we're going to go into Romans, but it's important to know that before we look at the verse, many of the habits that we have in our life are formed habits. What does this mean exactly? We aren't born with the patterns or the routines that we follow daily. And being kind is one of them. That's a good and a bad thing. So we aren't born being kind, but we have the opportunity to grow into a kind person. So, as humans, we have all sinned with the exception of Jesus. Romans 3:23 says we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. What does this mean? We do bad things that God tells us not to do, but still we're forgiven because of what Jesus has done on the cross for us. Colossians 2:14 says, He canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross. We are removed from our sins by what Jesus has done for us. The record is completely wiped clean. But that doesn't give us the options to go on and do whatever we want in our life while we have a don't care, will do attitude. We will always be loved by God, and we will always be forgiven by Him, but we must understand the gravity of our decisions before we make them. Now, I know how hard it is to know that you're forgiven and you have the option to do anything you want in the world and still choose to be obedient to God. But it's important to remember that having temptation or wanting to do those things is okay. Everyone has that feeling. But acting on the temptation is when it becomes sin, and that's not okay. So if we compare all of this to kindness somehow, not being kind to others is just as much a sin as anything else, because all sins are equal. And this is a really good thing, because if kindness is a struggle for you, it was paid for on the cross over 2,000 years ago. But it is also a sin, and the Bible has helped you by providing hundreds of stories of people who struggled with kindness and how God directed them in their life. The most famous book that addresses kindness headfirst is Proverbs. Now, Proverbs is considered to be a book full of wisdom, but the cool thing about Proverbs is that it's not told in a hard list of rules. Instead, it's told in stories. It can almost be thought of as if you're sitting around a campfire hearing someone you think is wise talk to you. And this is one of the reasons I really love the book of Proverbs. Solomon is the author of the book of Proverbs, and he was considered to be the wisest man alive because he understood and applied the lessons that God gave him. He compares wise words to a honeycomb. In Proverbs 16:24, he says, "Gracious words are a honeycomb. sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. If we take a minute to understand why this verse is so important and why on earth we can compare something that we eat or use to sweeten our foods, it's like our words, it actually gets pretty interesting. So honey has been known to have a lot of healing benefits since well before King Solomon's time. It can almost be thought of as the emergency or the first aid kit of the Bible's time. Honey can help with allergies, blood pressure, anxiety, pain, strengthening your immune system, and even healing some sicknesses. I mean, that's crazy, right? I know I only use it to sweeten some food or whenever I have a sore throat, but I never thought it would have all of those healing benefits. But if Solomon's comparing these honey to words, what does that mean about kind words? I think it tells a lot about how impactful kind words can be. In fact, they can help with helping people who are emotionally and physically worn out, building up people who feel worthless, encouraging those who are hurt, and comforting people in their darkest moment. All in all, this is just one example of the oxygen that God has given us in the Bible. These are some of the guidelines that God has given us that should power every reaction we have with other people. Our oxygen in the Bible is meant to be used daily, just like actual oxygen, because it shows us how to live our lives right. If you want your relationships with other people to be successful, using kind words is a must, and the best place to go for guidance is the foundation of all kind words, God. Now, this brings me to my second point. Your relationships with others will either fuel you or fail you. So there's two things to keep in mind. Fuel is the second thing that is needed for a successful fire, right? When we talked about in the beginning. But the people you are closest to are the people that you are most like. So if we jump into fuel for a second. Fuel is something that we all need. Our body has required different substances. We need nutrition, sleep, brain activity, and most importantly, social interactions. No matter who you are or your personality type, no one is alone. One of the big focuses of the Bayou is the fact that life is better together. This is something that I've experienced firsthand through Legacy Internship, and it's something that I've learned to love. Now, God has gifted us with community, and He wants us to have community as long as it's fueling our fire for Him and not failing out. According to 1 Corinthians 15:49, we are made in the image of God. It says, just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. Now, God had community with Adam and Eve before the fall. And if community was something that He created, it means that He wants us to have. But think about it. As long as it's fueling your fire and not taking away from Him. If people you're hanging out with are causing you to be further away from God, or even you're causing them to be further away from God in their relationships, it's best to step out of those friendships for the time being. Now, this is a hard lesson to live through, believe me. And if you're not in high school, it's definitely something you're going to face, because anyone that I go to school with definitely faced it, and I know I faced it when I got there. But if you can wrap your head around the idea that sometimes the relationships you're in are hurting you, or you're hurting their relationship with God, and it's best to leave those relationships, the transition into high school will be so much easier. This is something I wish I knew my freshman year, and I'm glad I had a chance to talk on it for a second today. Now, if we think about fuel again, fuel is never supposed to come at the expense of others' fires, nor your fire for God. Our fuel should be driven by the oxygen that God has given us. And this leads me to my third point. Our fuel should definitely come from the oxygen that God gave us. But we should also know that the successfulness of our fire is determined by our actions. My third point is the fact that our actions regulate the heat that we produce. How we act and deliver kind words is going to determine how much it impacts the person we're speaking to. Sure, kind words may be like honey, but nothing is ever going to be sweet if you don't add the sweetener. Knowing what honey is and actually using it are two entirely different things. Just like knowing what God says about your life and how you should live it and actually doing so. The more you speak life into people, the larger your impact is going to grow. Now, communication is something that God is great at. I mean, think about it. He spoke the universe into creation. I mean, he spoke it. He didn't think it or wait for someone else to come around and speak it for him, or he didn't even tweet it. He actually spoke it. Now, if you remember, we are made in the image of God. We might not be able to create entire universes by what we say, but our words could mean the world to someone who feels as if their world is falling apart. The power of God's word created nothing out of something. They had the power of life. If we jump back into Proverbs for a second, we can find that words can be much more powerful or much more dangerous than the healing benefits of honey. Proverbs 18:21 says that the tongue has the power of life and death. Of course, words have amazing benefits, but they can also have the potential to have really bad impacts. The fires that you create in relationships can light your world and their world too. Or it can become a place where you're constantly drawn into darkness away from God. You know you have your actions have a huge impact on the effectiveness at anything you can learn in these next 2 weeks. But it's important to understand that knowledge does not equal wisdom, and nor do lessons equal an influential person. You must apply to impact. So how could this all possibly connect? This brings me to the bottom line. The bottom line is that you shouldn't keep your kind words to yourself. You will never be able to predict how your words will impact someone because you never know who they are and how they're really feeling in that moment. The difference between using our words for life and death is the same difference between hurt and healing, and the same difference between a campfire and a forest fire. The importance of taking this bottom line and applying it to different areas in your life can be extremely impactful. And I thought before we summed everything up, I could give you all 3 areas that you could apply the fact that we don't keep our kind words to ourselves in your life. So first of all, you have people younger than you. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I have a younger sister. And no matter how much we get on each other's nerves, I know that I can still learn stuff from her. And she can still look up to me and learn stuff from me. Because no matter our age, we still learn from each other. And if we take the bottom line and we apply it to people younger than us, we're building up the next generation. So much of what we say to them will build up who they become later. I mean, think about it. Parents and other influential adults in your life took time out of their busy schedule to invest in you so that you can become a better person today. But what would have happened if they had been too busy or decided not to invest in you? Who would you be today without them? That leads me to the second group that we can influence, and that's people your own age. Now, believe me, I've noticed how awkward it can be when you're nice to people that's your own age. Our generation is so used to being negative to not only ourselves, but to others, that being kind just feels a little bit weird sometimes. But I mean, think about how messed up that is. Why is being kind so awkward? Now, I actually think that social media is a pretty good place when it comes to spreading kindness. Because I know when I scroll through my feed, I see a bunch of my friends posting positive comments under each other's pictures. But think about how much more impactful that would be if it was face to face. It's so much easier to communicate when you can throw a few emojis behind it. But easy doesn't lead to impactful, now does it? The last group that you can impact is people that are older than you. Now, I know some of you might think you're young, and that's a really big group of people to impact, but hear me out for a second. So we talked a little bit about how we need to build up people who are younger than us. But wouldn't it be cool if, as younger people, we built up the people who were investing in us? Now, I know what that one common argument is that I'm too young. I'm only in middle school. I'll wait till high school, and then I'll start to impact people. If I can tell you all a secret, as a high schooler, the argument doesn't change. It just becomes, I'm too young. I'm in high school. I'll wait till college. Now, I'm not in college, but I can assume that it just keeps going on and on. It's almost as if a wheel that doesn't stop rolling. But you're never going to become impactful if you don't decide you want to start impacting. Your age doesn't define your decisions, and it doesn't define your impact. Your impact is defined by your actions. So, it would be amazing if everyone just picked one area of their life to apply the bottom line, that we don't keep kind words to ourselves. Because just think about how the environments you're in would change for the better. So if we can sum everything up very quickly, we can actually realize that each of the points make up this bottom line. So the God-given oxygen provides a way for us to be exposed to what kind words should be like. The fuel-giving relationships provide environments where we can learn to be sharing and receiving kind words continuously. And lastly, our actions are the only way that this will work. We should not keep our kind words to ourselves, but of course that takes some kind of action. We must take what God has intended and what friendship He has blessed us with, and we need to take an action so we're spreading our kind words. And if we do this, we're going to stop playing with fire and start building a fire that speaks life into the people around us. Thank y'all, and pray for y'all real quick. Okay. God, I'm so thankful for everyone in here this morning. I pray that as we go back into this week, we're able to apply what we have covered today. A world that is revolutionized by students is a world revolutionized for tomorrow. I pray that each person hides your word in their heart so that being kind becomes not only easy, but second nature. I pray that we speak our kind words because holding them back holds us back. Please be with everyone as we go back to school tomorrow, and as the years goes on, we can make a change in each campus across Acadiana. A change that starts with kind words and ends with influence. I pray that everyone feels loved by you and spreads that love to all their friendships. Thank you for the opportunity to gather here today. Amen.